myself and my family to Bafoussam, a town where I could maybe rest and even stay away from the crisis. But actually, Madam, yes? Hello?
Sorry, please.
Hello?
Yes, you can continue. We can hear you.
Yeah. So actually, I was running from Batibo because of the Anglophone crisis, and teachers were the target at that time. And as an IDP in Bafoussam and in an urban town, I met so many other IDPs, people from the other region, Southwest, Northwest, many of them living in very horrible conditions. So it was not easy, even bread to eat, nothing, it was not going, even to send their children to school. So some of them were doing odd jobs, moving around the town and things like that. So we kept on encouraging them that we should only be praying, because it was not easy maybe to stop the crisis, even up to now. Really, we, as a head teacher, I invited some other friends who were my colleagues. We said, no, let's come out with a group, some leaders that can at least see how we can maybe write to the government, maybe meet some elites, meet some NGOs, and see how we can solicit assistance, because the situation on the ground was not the best and is not still the best. So actually we had to move from Bafoussam to other towns like Yaoundé, other towns like Bamenda again, through phone calls, some of the well-to-do elites that were there. We moved to Douala to solicit assistance. So actually, we were only struggling to get something for them to eat, something for them to at least keep life going, make ends meet. But really, we tried once in a while, tried to visit some. We saw that you see people living in one room, maybe a family of about 12 living in one room, the children sleeping on the ground. You reach there in the morning, the children are outside, there's nothing to eat. We kept on struggling, and the little that was coming in, the government came once and assisted the IDP. Then the rest, we struggled from elites who came in. Now, with the coming of COVID-19 in 2019, which was really serious, early 2020, we really saw that it was not easy any longer. Those who were moving around maybe to get one or two things doing were now confined. They could not move around. Most of them who had jobs, little jobs, the jobs were dropped. The situation back at home was not still the best. We are now still in a fix, and we don't know when the crisis would end. So all along we have been struggling, but our hands are already tied, because the people who kept on, who were like assisting us, they are now, the elites, they say no, they are like tired. Really, as somebody who has been struggling, seeing the situation at hand, I said, no, if forums like this can come up, if a conference like this should come up, let me at least say one or two things that maybe the members can think of it, maybe even give pieces of advice that can help the IDPs, maybe who are living in towns, me as an example, maybe for something better to come up. Really, we have not really been feeling fine, and we think, and as an IDP coordinator, I will maybe put on this forum, maybe just this question, maybe proposing and begging, maybe pieces of advice that you can give us, so that in our little corners, we can be able to put them through. I think that really, and then with the situation, we continue an appeal that whatever advice would be highly welcome, especially to see that there is a complete ceasefire. Really, it is not easy. It is not easy, Madam Moderator. It is not really easy with us, the Anglophones, especially those who are living in town, coupled with the situation of COVID-19 that is so serious, and lives are going every day, every day, every day. Once more, I wish to thank the University of Pretoria platform for the time they've taken to organize this forum. That really has not been easy. Just from Batibo subdivision, we're about 850 plus. And schools just started on the 5th of October. That is some 3 days behind. Many more Anglophones are still coming in. High cost of living, no houses to live inside. It is not really easy. So we think that if something can be done, something can be said, maybe to the government, so that there can be complete ceasefire and we return back to our homes, it will be highly welcome. And they really, to say that the situation too on the ground now is not really the best as far as IDPs who are living in town with the coming of COVID-19 is really serious. And we are like, instead getting to situations which are not very good. We don't know how these people are really living, how they are feeling. You see somebody is like, he has not bathed, he has not taken a bath, maybe for 2-3 days, he looks very miserable. And I think that whatever proposals, whatever suggestions will be highly welcome. I will stop here for now and still think that if there are any worries, I will be there to maybe still say something. Hello?
Thank you very much, Tembe. We really appreciate the very kind explanation you've given us this morning about the situation that you're currently going through, as with other persons as well. And of course, I think if the members of the floor also have questions following the presentations by other panelists, we would be sure to come back to this conversation much more importantly. We'll now move on to our next speaker, who is Mr. Onyime Eyo. Mr. Onyime Eyo is a seasoned lawyer and staff attorney at the Justice and Empowerment Initiative in Lagos, Nigeria. He's currently part of a legal advocacy effort and intervention that supports the Nigerian Slums and Informal Settlement Federation in Lagos. And he'll be speaking to us today about the realities of urban slum dwellers in the wake of COVID-19. Had taken a case study on forced evictions in Lagos, Nigeria. And he would also be speaking to us about his work significantly and making us understand the situation, but more importantly, how protection could be advanced for all the urban IDPs within the context of the situation in Lagos. Mr. Onyime, you have the floor. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Firstly, I would like to say a big thank you to Dr. Diola and the Center for Human Rights for extending this invitation. I think it's a very timely conversation, and I am happy to be, to be part of this. And I do hope to have lots of reflections on the subject living here. Just like Romola had highlighted earlier, I just want to talk about very quickly the realities of urban slum dwellers in the wake of COVID-19. Of course, drawing lessons from cases of forced evictions that we've witnessed historically here in the city of Lagos, pre-COVID and even the COVID era. So not to digress, but I just want to start off with this background. I want to begin by saying that African cities are evolving and are fast becoming centers for opportunities. And of course, this has led to trends in migration. And speaking from the Nigerian experience, Lagos happens to serve as a hub and an attraction for most. At the same time, we are steadily witnessing a high increase in rural-urban migration. People are coming into the city for a variety of reasons. Economic compulsions tied with upward mobility, search for better life and opportunities. And we must also understand that Lagos has a high population density and with a relatively small land mass. And so we have been left with lots of problems that we're battling with. And one of the big problems that we're facing in Lagos is that we have a housing crisis. And to put it more precisely, we have a formal housing deficit, which is quite unfavorable to the low-income populace, which is quite, which constitutes rather a significant percentage of the residents who are living in Lagos. And so it suffices to say at this point that there is a correlation between the unequal access to formal housing in the city and the emergence of slums and informal settlements spread across the city. I just want to be clear that slums and informal settlements in cities like Lagos are evidently byproducts of ignored inequalities and a dysfunctional urban governance system that disregards the needs of the urban poor. And so we have seen, just flowing from that, we've seen that with increased urbanization, city administrators have gotten more involved in the urban planning, to address these challenges. And I must say that Lagos has an overambitious developmental agenda. Lagos leaders pride themselves, and Lagos has aims to be one of Africa's model city by 2025. And it largely wants to achieve this through urban renewal, actually. And that has brought in big problems such as urban gentrification, land grab, and the people who are at the receiving end, the victims, are always the urban poor and the people who are resident in slums and informal settlement communities. I just want to make it clear that the resort to forced evictions, and I think it's a historical pattern that we've actually seen in Lagos. The facts are out there. Over the last decade, we've had government increasingly evict slum dwellers and people who are resident in informal settlements across the city. The trends are there. I mean, we over the last decade, we've had demolitions in Badia East and Otodobami. And shortly before we went into lockdown, we had a peaceful, loving community, a waterfront community called Takwa Bay, forcefully evicted, demolished by members of the Nigerian Navy on allegations that residents were involved in illegal tapping of resources. Now, COVID has struck, and what COVID has actually done is that it has heightened the vulnerabilities for slum dwellers and their communities, and more importantly, it has actually brought much more concerns for displaced urban slum dwellers who are basically victims of forced evictions. And I'm saying it because they've been made more susceptible to the risk associated with COVID-19. And I just want to, flowing from that, I just want to make it clear that their vulnerability to the health crisis isn't accidental, but as a logical result of the kind of non-inclusive cities we've built over the years. And at the moment, we have displaced urban slum dwellers, most of them who have been affected by forced evictions. You know, I just highlighted that we had evictions earlier on, shortly before we went into lockdown in January. They're basically homeless, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. And at the same time, I just want us to, you know, distinguish this reality and what urban slum dwellers have been facing before COVID. And it's quite different and entirely different from the worsened realities that has been brought by COVID-19. Earlier on, the World Health Organization had declared COVID-19 as a global emergency and had laid down precautions and medical protocols, you know, to stop the spread. But frankly speaking, that looks like that appears to be an inhumane joke for most slum communities here in Lagos, Nigeria, because there are certain things you can actually talk about. So we can talk about social distancing for slum communities. We can talk about isolation for displaced urban slum dwellers who are currently homeless, access to water to encourage hygienic practices as laid down by the World Health Organization remains a big problem. Healthcare is a big problem. So we have these are, I just want to quickly just talk about, like, these are the realities on ground when it comes to the situation. And just summarily, I'm just saying that COVID has actually brought worsened realities, because I mean, they're more exposed to, like I said earlier on, to the risk associated with COVID-19. And moving forward, I just want to quickly talk about, I mean, you know, bring home part of the things that we've been doing. But before I do that, I would like to, you know, start off with a critique in terms of protection and the government's response to the plight of urban IDPs in Lagos. I want to start off with the legal framework. The truth remains that for us to move forward in actualizing the rights of urban IDPs, we need to have an existing legal framework. That, of course, these frameworks actually prescribes, you know, spells out obligations of parties and what people are supposed to do to clearly advance the rights of IDPs. And when I mean IDPs, I mean, I'm also cognizant of the fact that, I mean, Nigeria, we have armed conflict in the northeastern part, so just including urban IDPs. And so at the moment, Nigeria lacks a committed domestic legal framework that affords protection for IDPs. And I mean, we are party to the Kampala Convention. We have the United Nations guiding principle on internal displacement. We have the Kampala Convention on assistance and protection of IDPs, which Nigeria signed and ratified, but hasn't been domesticated. And then sometime in 2003, rather, I mean, like flowing from discussions from the guiding principles, we had a committee that was set up a national policy for IDPs in the country. And it took them 7 years. You know, we have a draft policy at the moment, a national IDP policy that spells out, right, just more like there are extracts from the Kampala Convention and the United Nations guiding principle. But the problem with the national policy at the moment is that it lacks a legal force. As a matter of fact, government can't really act on it, and then it cannot enable the relevant institutions to perform their work effectively in ensuring, or rather actualizing, the rights of IDPs, most in specifically speaking in my context, I mean urban IDPs. And so I'm just trying to, you know, reiterate the laid back attitude of the government, you know, in, you know, putting things in place to actualize the rights of IDPs. I just want to also share that we have, just shedding more light on the legal protection and the problems that we've had with that. We have the National Commission for Refugees Act that has been, is actually yet to be repealed. And that is actually to extend the mandate of the institution saddled with the responsibility to cater for the growing needs of IDPs, migrants, and displaced persons in Nigeria as a whole. And as I'm speaking at the moment, it's just lying on the floor of the lower house of the National Assembly, and nothing has been done about it. And so these reality on ground when it comes to legal protection, of course, hampers any form of actualization for urban IDPs. And so I just want to move from that and talk about what we have been doing as a grassroots organization back here in Lagos at Justice and Empowerment Initiatives. We work closely with the Nigerian Federation of Slums and Informal Settlement. And one of the strategies, one of the tools we have been using to, advocate for the rights of urban IDPs, one of the things, the tools we've been employing has been public interest litigation. And well, that, frankly speaking, that has really helped a little bit. Basically, we are of the opinion that democratic institutions such as the courts remain the last resort for the common man and the ordinary man, and more importantly for vulnerable groups. And so basically what we do is that we together with the Nigerian Federation, we get the mandates of these communities who have been forcefully evicted, these slum dwellers who have been evicted, and we embark on community profiling just to make sure that we have adequate data. And then these are all reflected in our legal arguments. And then we approach the courts basically to request for a broad and expansive interpretations to the civil and political rights, which we have in the Constitution, and which, extensively covers a wide range of rights for the urban IDPs. And frankly speaking, I just want to say that that has saved lives, saved livelihoods. It has actually brought the spotlight on the government and reduced the tempo for forced evictions that we've witnessed here in Lagos. And at the same time, it has actually given room for intergovernmental dialogue where we're able to engage with the government and tell them, okay, this is the way we can actually do it. We can actually do it this way. We have all of the data. We have all of the models from these slum communities, to help the government to basically to bring it forward for the government to help in, addressing their growing concerns. I must say that, of course, there is a growing critique for respect for court orders in a place like Nigeria and Lagos particularly. But I just want to say that, frankly, that has remained one of the most important tools that we have used to preserve the rights for IDPs, most especially in this period. So I just want to give you a quick one. Shortly before we went into lockdown, I think I said that earlier on, we had Takwa Bay, a waterfront community demolished by the members of the Nigerian Navy. And we approached the Federal High Court and we brought these arguments, you understand, and asked the court to give a meaningful interpretation to the available rights for IDPs. And since I had spoken earlier about the fragmented legal framework for protection in Nigeria as a whole, I feel at the moment the Constitution happens to be the most important legal instrument that we drive in ensuring that we can make IDPs enjoy their rights. Why? Because IDPs, urban IDPs, are within state borders, and as such, they are actually citizens of the country, and of course, they have the right to enjoy the basic rights that are available. We've been having, problems with enforcement of court judgments, and we have lots of them. Lagos has a pattern for that, but I am just reiterating my position that it's been helpful, and especially in situations like this, in situations of pandemics like COVID-19, we have had slum communities under threat of evictions, and then we basically are on the standby to make sure that we approach the courts and ask for injunctions, make sure that lives are not destroyed and livelihoods. So that's one of the most. I'm just sharing some of the things that we're doing in terms of affording protection, making sure that we push for the rights of urban IDPs. I just want to wrap up by saying that. COVID has afforded us an opportunity for lots of reflections, and I feel it's a time for us to look at the underlying ignored inequalities and see how we can build more inclusive cities and prioritize social and economic rights. And frankly speaking, like I said earlier, and I'm saying it again, I feel that, in moving forward, I feel that public interest litigation can be a very viable tool in this season in making sure that the rights of urban IDPs are preserved. Of course, I am mindful of the fact that Nigeria has a shaky constitutional democracy as compared to other climes, like South Africa and other countries. But I feel that this is part of the efforts that we want to continue and make sure that we try as much as possible to bring up these creative ways of finding protection for IDPs through our democratic institutions. Thank you. And I'd like to yield the floor back to Dr. Odiola.
Thank you very much, Mr. Inyume, for really leading us through that process and telling us what you're currently doing in your organization, but more importantly, telling us about the situation that is currently unraveling and that has been over the past couple of months in Lagos, Nigeria, in relation to slum dwellers and displaced urban settlers. At this point, I'd like to kindly invite Mr. Joseph Jeng Akech, who is a human rights lawyer and doctoral research in constitution building and in South Sudan. He's South Sudanese, and he is also an advisor for Save the Children. And I'd like to probably have him take the floor to speak with us for the next couple of minutes on urban IDPs, reflecting on the case on South Sudan experience with a focus on Juba. And maybe just to, as a housekeeping arrangement, if you could kindly, if you have questions, please kindly put them on the chat box. Of course, after the discussion by panelists, we would have a Q&A session where you could ask your questions live, or if you'd like to probably put it on the chat and have us read it out, so that would also be welcome. And just maybe before Mr. Akech takes the floor, I'd just like to iterate that there is an online course on internal displacement, which is hosted by our partners in the Global Engagement Network on Internal Displacement, and that's specifically the University of London. I think towards the end of this program, I suppose I'd also like to give the floor to Professor David Cantor to just probably say one or two things about the course. But just to give you a brief background, it's an online course that provides knowledge on internal displacement in the comfort of your private space, pretty much being that it's online, and this in the coming days, it would actually be hosted on Zoom live, and you would have the opportunity to also meet the tutors. And if you're interested in taking this course, please kindly drop your email within the chat box, or probably would put a link there to, or an email address for which you can send an email to, just stating that you'd like to be part of the course. Please kindly know that the course is for free, and it's over a period of 6 weeks, and it significantly provides insight on internal displacement. And without further ado, I'd just like to invite Mr. Joseph Jeng Akech to take us through his presentation on urban IDPs, reflecting on the South Sudanese experience. Mr. Joseph, you have the floor.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm not sure whether you can see my presentation, because I can't see it here. Hello?
Yes, hello. We can't see your, I think we could see your laptop, but not your presentation earlier. Oh yes, we can see your presentation now, yes.
You can see it now, all right.
That's awesome. But if you could just maybe make it bigger, or just increase, yes, that's awesome. Yes, okay. Perfect.
Right, good. Yeah, thank you so much. Like Dr. Romola said, my name is Joseph Akech. I work for Save the Children as the Advocacy and Campaigns Director. But I do this presentation as, constitutional law researcher and someone who understands and lives in South Sudan. And I've interacted with the situation that befalls IDPs in this time of COVID-19. So really it's a story of double, vulnerabilities in my view, because the IDPs are already living, in terms of South Sudanese context, living in a very difficult situation. And now with COVID-19, it seems as if it's an add-on vulnerability. So I will, in 3 parts, within 10 minutes, just talk to you about the context in South Sudan without boring with what you know already from the internet, and then show the trends of IDP settlements with a focus on Juba to see the specific situation for IDPs, especially children and women. And then I conclude with some policy implications. What does it mean for South Sudan going forward? The country was born in 2011 with a lot of expectation that it was going to be a very good case study for a breakup in Africa. But 2 years later, it went into conflict, most of which, most of you are aware of that, in 2013. And that conflict displaced a lot of people across the country, with majority being displaced into other countries, neighboring countries, Uganda, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and DRC predominantly. And so as we stand now, it's estimated that 1.9 million children, 1.9 million people are IDPs, most of whom are living in a very difficult situation. And I should add that something that is quite unique perhaps to many urban situations across Africa is when the conflict started, there were some people who were targeted on the basis of their ethnicity, or they felt that because the conflict has taken ethnic dimension, that they needed protection. So the UN established the protection of civilian camps, which were then run and are still being run by the UN to protect these IDPs. So there are estimated 200,000 people living in these camps, 5 camps across South Sudan. And the camps are actually established in town. So Juba, Malakal, Wau, Bintiu, and Bor. So already, because of conflict, we have seen a large number of IDPs, in the urban settings. And of course, they don't work. Most of them would have to go hustling around, during the day and come back in the evening. And as an add-on to that situation of conflict, the economy has been affected usually by, people are unable to move about, as well as the treasury has been emptied by the conflict and war. And the IDPs in particular are suffering because they are unable to make ends meet. And so the economy is added to the vulnerability that IDPs are already facing. Now, when the peace agreement was signed in 2018, the government pledged to support IDPs return to their places and work with humanitarian organizations like Save the Children and UN agencies to support these IDPs. So the IDPs that have been displaced across South Sudan are, some of them are beginning to come back to their areas, but of course, with the heightened situation in terms of ethnic and communal violence that is taking place in parts of Jonglei, this has affected the voluntary return of some IDPs. We anticipate, as it has been said by NGO actors, that the refugees will also come back from Uganda, Sudan mostly, and Ethiopia if peace returns. So we are hoping for a huge return, but the situation is really volatile for most communities who are fighting one another because of competition over resources, land, and grazing areas, and that does impact the spontaneous returns of IDPs to their places of origin. So that sort of tells you the context in which IDPs are living. In Juba, what we see predominantly is now the surge in children living on the streets because these families are displaced and are living on their own. It's quite difficult to earn a living, and so children have been sent on the street either by themselves, or sometimes the parents would just allow them to go look for what to eat. And as a children's rights organization, we're seeing a huge increase in children on the streets, and also the rise in urban slums, which is something that is unexpected really, because South Sudan has a huge land, and there shouldn't be a problem of land in terms of space to stay, although there are legal issues access to land. But now Islam are rising in Juba and other cities across South Sudan. And this we understand is because of the economic conditions that the IDPs are facing. And when COVID-19 arrived, South Sudan did not lock down the entire country. However, the businesses were interrupted because the supply chain of our business depends on the neighboring countries, Uganda predominantly. And so with the restricted movement of supplies, small scale businesses were affected. And IDPs who then depend on hustling and moving around on the streets to make ends meet were usually affected. And the restrictions around COVID-19 could not really make sense to them, making sure that they get access to sanitizing materials, water. It's like they can't afford it because already they are struggling to make ends meet. And I think the government therefore realized that they cannot lock down the entire country because there are more vulnerable people that would not be able to make a living. And therefore there is a need in terms of ensuring that these people are supported. There's a need to reconsider the legal framework on access to land so that we reduce the risk of slums rising in Juba and other cities. And secondly, that with COVID-19 now, in South Sudan, although the numbers are not that much, that the IDPs are supported to access, water, because that water already they would not get without money, that they are able to get water to wash their hands and keep the COVID-19 protocols, and that somehow they are supported to, cushion the loss of income from the hustling business that they used to do. But for the long term, the country is undergoing a constitution-making process, which is an opportunity to make sure that the legal framework on IDPs is enhanced, that people who are going to be displaced for one reason or the other have access to economic and social support, and in particular, the implementation of social economic policies on access to soft loans for families that will need to start business, but also supporting those families to, access education for free, because the IDP families who really already struggle to get food, let alone education. So I think that is an opportunity, because as South Sudan implements a peace agreement, fragile as it may be, we see the opportunity to engage as IDP community. Is likely to be left behind in terms of their needs now and also in the future. And as we see the questions of land, access to land, as well as access to social services is paramount. In the recent past, we have also the intervening factor of floods, which have displaced people in Jonglei, those who live along the Nile, and have moved to certain places around Juba. That has sparked tension between the locals who live in those areas and the displaced community. The locals allege that these people are coming to take our land, and that we don't want to welcome them. So that raises a question around land management, and although there is the Land Act and the Constitution, there are opportunities to have further discussion within the new constitution making process to ensure that the question of land and access to social services such as food are guaranteed. So I think I'll leave it there and allow questions from everyone if there are specific questions. But I think it's good to end here by saying that the South Sudanese context is informed by conflict, the humanitarian situation that comes about because of the intercommunal violence and floods and food insecurity. And then it's a nation in making. So, communities are yet to accept one another. So when there is a displacement, Even in towns, it's quite difficult to access, place of living. And if they choose to live outside of town, in places that are, empty, the community there would say, issues of welcoming them and accepting them to live side by side are arise here and there, because the questions of land are not yet settled. But like I said, there is opportunity to have this discussion included into the constitution making process. And lastly, the humanitarian organizations are already doing a lot, responding to victims of floods and intercommunal violence. And with the rise in IDP comes, there's now a discussion within the humanitarian sector to engage in urban programming, because families who live in urban areas are sort of neglected. There's expectation that when you are in Juba, it's as if you have access to services, but that's not, because you still have to get those services by paying. And if you don't have means of income, it's unlikely that you get those services. So a vast majority of humanitarian programming is outside, quote unquote, in terms of the Juba locality and other cities. And so urban programming, even by government, is something that we recommend and should be looking into. And also that the South Sudanese government ratify and domesticate international instrument like the Kampala Protocol to ensure that IDPs have access to services and are integrated in the community, with, of course, peace prevailing, that people are able to move about in South Sudan. So I'll leave it there, and I'll, welcome questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph, for your presentation. Very much appreciated. And I think this really leads us very, very smoothly into the question and answer session. And I'd just like to ask I do see that there's some questions already in the chat box, and would like to have questions now. Please, if you would like to ask a question, kindly indicate by the show of hands. Just use the raise hand button in your panel underneath. And maybe while that is going on, please, I'd like to reiterate, thank you so much for those that had already sent through their emails. If you'd like to participate in the course, please kindly drop your email in the chat box in order for us to be able to have it copied along. So I do see Mr. Richard Obedi. You have a question. Yes, could you start us off with your question? And please, if you do have a question, and even if you've put your question in the chat box, but you'd like to ask right now, kindly raise up your hand with the button, and we would be sure to call on you. But I'll just call upon Mr. Richard Obedi. Kindly, yes, ask your question. Yes.
Hello?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Hello?
Hello? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, please, you can go ahead and ask it.
Yes, thank you. My name is Richard Obedi from. Yes, my name is Richard Obedi from Uganda. I'm interested in the topic that's being discussed. I like the discussion that Mr. Cage and then the previous speaker, if that's the correct, I have something to do with the Kampala Declaration. We have two scenarios in Uganda. I'll just make it fast. Number one, we've actually, I run an organization called the Populist Foundation International, and we've taken government to court. The ruling is possibly next week or in 2 weeks' time from now. Since 2013, we've been battling, especially those whom IDP camps were established on their land. So we took government to court. We registered them into an association with over 5,000 members, and they're trying to seek redress for the damages caused on the environment, the way it was depleted, damaged, and the land. Personally, I also participated in an IDP, the national IDP policy, and Uganda, as you might be aware, has actually one of the best policies, whether for the refugee and then for the IDP. But the office of the Prime Minister, which is, hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, yes. The docket that is concerned with issues of refugees and IDPs there's a group that were displaced as a result of the war in Northern Uganda, and they came to Kampala, urban IDPs. They themselves, they have their paperwork. The office of the Prime Minister, at once discarded them away. Now, the dilemma they have not got justice. So I was of the opinion that how can such a might be COVID period, but the IDPs that were actually disregarded by government of Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. I think there was just a break in the network while you were making that very pertinent point. And I was just wondering if it would be possible for you to probably give us a summary on the chat box as well. I think there's just a little issue with the connection. But I think you were making a very important point that we'd like you to... Yes, if we can just put it on the chat box and then we can read it after this time so that everyone could get it. Thank you so much.
Yes, I'll put it on the chat. Yes. You're welcome.
Thank you. And next I see that Professor David Cantor, you have a question. The floor is yours.
Oh, well, very good morning, everybody. And well done, of course, Romola, for an excellent organised event. The speakers, Mr. Tembe, Mr. Ayo, Mr. Akech, I thought the presentations were spectacularly good and really focused us on the crucial points about IDPs in urban contexts. If I can make, I think, just a brief comment and a question. That is that your presentations very much brought through the idea that in these urban contexts, IDPs often end up in situations or in sectors of cities which are already poor, which face various infrastructure problems, etc. And the IDPs, if you like, come into that setting and they're already at a disadvantage. And that came across really clearly in all three presentations. Clearly, as you suggested, Mr. Ayo, there's processes of urbanization which need to be dealt with there. And I think, your point about the real need to include IDPs in urban planning is extremely valuable. And in fact, my question goes a little bit towards that. One of the things that came across in some of the comments on the chat box and also in the presentations is that law might play a role in ensuring that IDPs are included in, let's say, urban development plans, or that IDPs' access to particular services are guaranteed. And I wondered just if each of the speakers, when we go back to you, might like to say, in your particular context, what do you think would be the one most important thing that law, whether it's public interest litigation or an alliance of human rights defenders, as one of the other commentators in the chat box suggested, what in your context would be the one most important thing that you think a legal approach to this might do? And whether there are other approaches aside from the law that might be equally or more useful. So thank you again very much. I thought it was a really good set of presentations. I look forward to the further questions and your responses to them.
Thank you very much, Prof. David Cantor, for that pertinent question. And I think I'll just give the floor to the panelists to take us through the question. And probably we'll begin with Mr. Onyeme, and then we move to Mr. Joseph, and then we move to Mr. Tembe. Thank you. Mr. Onyeme, you have the floor.
All right, yes, thank you so much for the question. I've actually seen other comments on the chat, giving like a critique also on some of the attempts, using like the legal angle, to make sure that we have like some sort of a guarantee for urban IDPs. I just want to say that, I would really be speaking from a legal perspective. I feel like, the starting point would be, legal protection. And like I said earlier on, I said that we've had a laid back attitude, you know, and the fragmented legal framework. I had shed light on the national policy on IDPs that we've had. I've talked about the NCF Act that's currently lying on the floor of the National Assembly, and we're saying we can't actually wait for, you know, government to put themselves together. And we're saying that just reiterating once again that the democratic institutions are available in all of these regimes are the ones saddled with the responsibility to, you know, give some sort of hope. And I feel that this happens when, like I highlighted earlier, when a broad interpretation is given to these rights, these available rights. I am much mindful of the fact that most of the rights for urban IDPs are around socioeconomic rights. I am very mindful of that fact, but we're trying to find creative means of urging the courts to look at the available civil and political rights. For instance, you're saying, you know, you're evicting slum dwellers, you're taking them off their roofs and all of that, and you're saying they have a right to life, and you know, implicit of that right has, you know, a right to a means of livelihood. So they're supposed to have a means, have a roof over their head. So if you're taking that away from them, then it practically makes no sense. And so if the courts can give these, and like I said earlier on, we've had some sort of a general reluctance from the courts here in Nigeria. And that's why I believe that advocacy must remain here in giving these broad interpretations. We can't wait for, you know, the domestication of the Kampala Convention. We need to use what we have, you know, to ensure that protection are given for urban IDPs. And then on the other hand, you know, apart from, you know, public interest litigation, I feel like dialogue remains very important. And back here in Nigeria, like I said earlier on, it's a mobilized and an organized community, the Nigerian Federation of Slum Informal Settlements. And so we do lots of things, and we have the data, we have the urban planning initiatives and things to do comparatively with other parts in the continent, you know, on issues like on-site upgrading. So these are some of the things that can be shared with the government. And I remember sometime 2 years ago, we had the managing director of the Lagos State Urban Renewal Agency was taken to Kenya to see how slum communities, you know, are organized and how they can be upgraded rather than just getting, you know, taking them off. So I'm saying what happens is that, you know, the litigation, like I said earlier on, gives a spotlight on government, and sometimes, you know, tells them, you know, brings down the tempo on forced evictions, and affords us an opportunity to, you know, see how we can have a conversation and bring out some of these concerns for urban IDPs. But I must say that it's not something that is really happening. I'm not saying we still have problems, and the government is not really giving a listening ear, but my argument is that it's been working in some parts of Africa, although I don't really want to speak much about that, but I feel it can also work in Nigeria. And so these are my thoughts at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nyime, for your response. And I'd just like to call upon Mr. Joseph Okech.
Yeah, no, I very much align my thinking to the previous speaker. However, we do not see a legal solution in terms of the South Sudanese context, because, like I said, you know, it's a nation in the making, and we are in a dialogue, you know, to forge a nation that accommodates everybody. So, you know, the legal institutions and other institutions of democracy are quite weak and at times unavailable in the local government level. So really, the solution seems to lie in the dialogue. As I've said previously, communities, so we have, in terms of the land, access to land, our constitution stipulates land in terms of, you know, community land, government land, and private land. And a huge chunk of land seems to be owned by the community. So you really need a dialogue when people are displaced to have these people accommodated. And whilst we do not have such a big problem of urban slums, this could easily be the problem if we do not address the question of land. So in that case, then we have to use the opportunity that's available with the law reform process that the peace agreement presents, to sort of start the dialogue on, you know, what reforms do we need to have in order to make sure that people can access land whenever they are displaced. But I think for us, it's really more into addressing the sources of conflict. Of course, we will always have conflict, but here, the elephant in the room for us in the South Sudan is, address the political conflict, ensure that community, intercommunal violence is reduced, so that you have less number of people who are displaced and will need to live in the cities. And in the long run, and maybe now also address the question of economic decline, because most people choose to come to towns because of economic reasons. And so making life better for people back home in their communities, like our late John Garang said, in taking town to the people. So perhaps really giving services to the people where they live, so that we reduce movement, displacement of people. And so the dialogue is key, whilst we then have a discussion around the legal framework within the constitution, but not really the litigation as we see it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akech, for that brilliant, insightful presentation. Mr. Tembe, you have the floor.
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Tembe, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. I think the situation on the ground is a little bit very complicated, especially back in the Anglophone regions. So the way forward to begin with, if some humanitarian organizations, well-wishers, donors can come in to assist, especially the children who are not really going to school, they don't have something to eat, then the women and things like that. I think for now, we can have a smile. So really, there is actually a lot on the ground, but we think that some assistance for the IDPs who are living in unbound towns, because they cannot go back home, they must live there no matter the conditions. So really, we are really appealing, and we think that if some other organizations can come in maybe to see how there should be complete ceasefire, so that maybe in the days ahead, people should think of going back, then it will be highly appreciated. Once more, thank you very much.
Many thanks, Mr. Tembe, for that pertinent intervention. I do see that we have some questions already. We had some questions on the chat box, and I would just like to read two questions. So there was one question from Dr. Robodoya Nanima, and I think this question was for Mr. Unyime Ayo, that you said, I think I'll just read out the question. You've spoken about Justice Empowerment Initiative, an organization working in Lagos. Has the government allowed the continued operation of community-based paralegals as a crucial mode in the provision of access to justice during the lockdown? I think that was your question. I also see that Mr. Lloyd Kuveya also asked the question, and his question was, could you give us a brief summary of the court's interpretation of the rights of the IDPs forcibly evicted? I think this question also goes to Mr. Unyime. I see that there were a few comments, but please, if you would like to ask your questions, just let us know by raising up your hand. And I do see that Miss Leah, you had a question, but apparently you couldn't access the button. So could you probably unmute your mic and ask your question? Thank you. Miss Leah? Oh, I see we have two other people who have their hands raised up. So Miss Leah, after you, would have Dr. Walters, and then would have Miss Adelakun. Yes, let's go. Yes, you have the floor now, Miss Leah.
Okay, thanks. My name is Leah from Nelson Mandela University. First of all, I would like to thank all the presenters for wonderful presentations, and they are they are informative, and I really commend them. And is sad that to see what is currently happening, not only in Cameroon or Nigeria or South Sudan, but I think this is a problem which has been witnessed in many African countries. But my issue is why maybe there is a kind of reluctance of the member states of the AU to either to ratify or to, even for those who have ratified, like the case of Nigeria, when it comes to domestication, it becomes a big issue. I don't know what could be the problem, but anyway, I don't want to go to that, but I would rather want to ask a question, especially directing to Mr. Oye. Is it Mr. Oye? The second presenter, and
Mr. Ayo.
also, yes, and the third presenter. What is your take when it comes to tackling the issues of IDPs in a global context? What I mean by global context, I mean to have a kind of collaboration, because in many cases, and specifically in Africa, we tend to like to work in silos. As a result, we don't get anywhere. Yes, I can see the move, for instance, of maybe taking the matter to the court so that the issue can be addressed in a judicial way. But at the end of the day, most of the government are not complying even with the court orders. How about maybe collaborating with other people? For instance, collaborating with academic institutions so that the issue of IDPs can be addressed properly, because it seems when I look, I'm a lecturer at the Nelson Mandela University. I see even in the cases of maybe curriculum, which what we are teaching our students, some institutions may even not have a clue on what IDPs are. So what do you think? Would you maybe think of having some kind of collaboration beyond what you are currently doing? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your pertinent question. And I think this is also a question that I would also like Prof. David Cantor probably to come on with, given the fact that we're actually having a collaboration around developing content research. And in fact, he's the director of the Internal Displacement Research Program, which also is very pertinent to this process. So maybe just like him to come up to give a response as with our other panelists as well. But maybe just before he comes up, I'd like to have our other participants. I do see Dr. Walters has his hand up, and Ms. Adelakun. So I'll just have you ask your questions, and then maybe in terms of response, would have it in this order. Professor David Cantor, you just probably respond to that question, and then would have Mr. Unyime respond, and I think would also have Mr. Joseph respond. Thank you. Dr. Walters, you have the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Romola. I just would wish to go back to, I think, a critical question that Professor Cantor asked the panelists. Of course, I'm not one of the panelists, but I would just use this opportunity to throw more light on what I think is a perspective that is very important for those who are interested in helping IDPs, including urban IDPs. What I seem to notice is that so many IDPs are not aware of their rights and their entitlements when it comes to protection, that is supposed to be provided by government or by other international organizations. So one thing that is very important to do is to just to sensitize them on, educate them on their rights, because if you don't know your rights, you can't claim it. And then on the added value of law, I think in a context of conflict where you have IDPs, it's important to have a legal office that provides free services to IDPs. Of course, considering their vulnerabilities, they don't have money. Even if you have lawyers in their neighborhoods, they wouldn't be able to seek the assistance without having the money to pay for. So providing a free legal service to support IDPs claim their rights, I think is critically very important. Those are the two aspects I wanted to raise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walton. I think you have been very humble in your introduction because you're one of the advisors on GENIDA, and in fact, you've been very instrumental in also getting GENIDA to really function. So thank you very much. And thank you also were also very instrumental in helping us get Mr. Tembe today to speak at this event. Thank you for that pertinent point you've made. I'd now like to call on Professor David Cantor. Oh, sorry, I think just before he comes up, my apologies, just before he comes up, Ms. Adelakun, I think you had a question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dola. Okay, my question is to Mr. Ayo. So basically, I just want to ask that probably an observation and then a question. That, okay, you keep dwelling on the legal protection of IDPs, but for you to actually have an effective legal protection, or maybe even a starting point to base your public interest litigation on, there must be that specific legal framework on which you can actually hit these rights to. So apart from the Constitution, which provides for the general rights, the fundamental rights and the socio-economic rights, the directives in Chapter 2, do you not think that, okay, a good way or a better starting point to get the attention of the government would be to start advocating for the domestication of the Kampala Convention? That is the first one. Then secondly, I think we have to be careful when we just take a position. We have to understand the cultural and the diversity or the demands, the peculiar nature of each country. You cannot say because public interest litigation works in South Africa, then automatically it's something we can use in Nigeria. You really have to understand what works for each country, how to get the attention of the government. Looking at the trend in getting legal protection for minority groups or for vulnerable groups, I think something that has worked very well in Nigeria is to get the attention of the government by advocacy. So why not talk about, and I like the fact that somebody has mentioned the impact of humanitarian workers or CSOs and NGOs. Why not look at it from the angle of engagement, like getting attention of the government by advocacy, by engaging them, dialogue, to actually domesticate the Kampala Convention, which will now form the basis on which you can say, oh, we want to enforce or make the government accountable for the rights of the IDPs. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your pertinent question and also your insightful analysis of the situation. I'd now like to give the floor to Mr. Onyeme to kindly respond. And I think after him, Mr. Okech, and then we would then have the final response from Professor Cantor. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for the questions. I just want to pick up from the very last question. I just want to make it clear that how do I even put it? But we're not, nobody's opposed to, I'm speaking from the Nigerian experience, to, advocating for the domestication of all these legal instruments. And like I shared earlier on, I said that we have signed and ratified the Kampala Convention, but it has not been domesticated. And so that has left us, left a vacuum. And then I just reiterated that at the same point, whilst we are waiting, whilst of course there have been advocacy, to urge the government to domesticate these human rights provisions for IDPs. But I am just saying, and the simple message I passed on today is that the Constitution, whilst we wait for all of that, whilst we put so much pressure on the government, the Constitution remains a very important piece of document, that can that spells out these rights. Now, bearing in mind that IDPs are within state borders, and so automatically it simply means that they are citizens of the state. I'm not talking about refugees. And so if they are citizens of the state, then it means they are entitled, like every other citizen of the country, to these rights that are enshrined in the Constitution. And most of these rights, like I shared earlier on, the UNSN extensively covers the traditional rights, as we see reflected in provisions from the United Nations Guiding Principle on the Kampala Convention. And that's just it on that. I just want to quickly, there was a question around community-based paralegals. I just want to pick up all the questions at once. Yes, we've realized that at this point in time, access to justice remains a very big issue. And then some of the problems that we know when it comes to access to justice, that sometimes it could be so expensive. And so we back at home, we have a large network of community paralegals that are trained in these communities. They're basically armed with the knowledge of the law, and they go back and they're able to take up, cases at that level, and things that are quite manageable at their own level. They're able to embark on them, follow up with with cases, and follow the lawyers, to court, and just to make sure that the grassroots justice actually works. And yes, of course, like during COVID, we had issues with restrictions, and I think it was much of a debate if legal services are essential services. But during COVID period, we had some paralegals that were active. We had increased cases of unnecessary police arrest and detention, most especially for the urban poor, and we had some community paralegals who were able to go out, with, of course, with permits, and sometimes with lawyers, to these police stations, to bail out people. And if matters are arraigned before the mobile courts, they go hand in hand with the lawyers. Of course, we've had ease of restrictions here in Lagos, so the work is very much active. And lastly, about the court's interpretation to IDP rights in Nigeria. I think I just want to make reference to the High Court's judgment we had in 2017 about the Otodobami demolitions. Now, I think I've been reiterating this over and over again. We approached the court in Otodobami. We had a peaceful settlement of about 30,000 people that were displaced, by the Lagos State government. At the moment, the Otodobami settlement serves as a luxury estate for, of course, for the rich people. And the arguments that we brought before the court is that, people have, a right to a means of livelihood. You understand? People have a right, to a right over their head. And the courts would have to give an implicit interpretation to the right to life to extend to this. And of course, the courts gave the orders and the declarations that the forced evictions in Otodobami was unconstitutional and, gross violation of human rights, right to dignity of persons and all of that. And of course, urged the Lagos State government to go into immediate consultation with the residents, displaced residents. And I'm just saying that I had commented on, the unwillingness of the courts, but I still feel that it's the way to go. We want the courts to be more vocal about these issues and get these pronouncements much more, precise, to make sure that these rights are enjoyable or realizable for the displaced population. But at the same time, I must also let you know that, of course, there are efforts back at home to, engage with government, to pressurize, the government to domesticate the Kampala Convention and other important legal instruments, so that we have like a strong legal framework. But whilst we wait, we need to use what we have. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much for the pertinent response. I'd like to give the floor now to Mr. Joseph.
Okay, I really, to pick up from the point my brother made there, that it's in the dialogue. I mean, we differ somehow with the experience in Nigeria, because ours is not about eviction as such. It's more to do with, you know, access to land, but also the poverty that these people find themselves in. So to address this going forward, it seems to me that, of course, justice it has to be provided, and we do not have a specific questions of injustice that are experienced by IDPs, except the access to land, because you know, they are citizens and they should enjoy other rights that everyone enjoys. But I think for me, the implications of the IDPs as we see them emerging in urban centers is because of the conflict. So really to address the conflict and ensure that you know, people are not displaced, or if they are going to be displaced, that there's a mechanism that is in place to address their needs. For example, enhancing the capacity of the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, which handles the issues of the IDPs here, and ensuring that the government has, you know, signed up to requisite legal frameworks such as the Kampala Convention, and provided domestic remedies for ensuring that, you know, the IDPs have access to rights that are accruing from those treaties and the legal framework. And I do not see much difference in terms of the South Sudanese context coming from the implementation of the laws as such, because, I mean, let's be realistic, you know, we're struggling even to provide food to the rest of the people. So really, it's ensuring that humanitarian needs of these people are met, and that we address the root causes of their displacement to ensure that they go back to their places. And perhaps maybe as now we embark on the constitution making process and rebuilding the nation, that the IDPs are not left out, that the IDPs are part of the national dialogue, that they are part of the conversation about, you know, structuring the future. And more importantly, that they tell us their unique experiences, because they do face unique experiences. So I think for me, it's really inclusivity, dialogue, and ensuring that we address the root causes of displacement in the South Sudanese context.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for that pertinent points. And maybe just to reiterate, please, if you would like to take part in the online course but have not yet put your email address in the chat box, please kindly do that. I'm speaking about the online course on internal displacement. And on this note, I'd like to invite Mr. Tembe to kindly make a contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Actually, this word peace is a very simple word, but difficult to come by or to apply it in the context in which we in Cameroon will find ourselves now, especially the Anglophone regions. Really, we are appealing that from bottom to top, if there is anything anybody can do, be it at the level of any humanitarian organization, any international organization, it should be how peace can reign in Cameroon between the separatists and the government. I think the government started already doing something, but it is still not yielding any fruit. Everybody who left the villages maybe are now in towns, like the case in Bafoussam. Actually, they are all nostalgic. They are feeling as going at home, because at home you can easily struggle with life and things will go. But when you are living in a strange town, and not to talk about an urban town where you pay bills, you are like, you know, you are not sure of your meal the next day. Things are really not the best. I think to talk here, there are equally families that have struggled, come up with children into these urban towns, but now they cannot meet up with maybe basic education for these children. These children are still back at home. You pass by, they say they don't have exercise book, they don't have pens. We think that if there is any assistance to that direction, it will be highly welcome. Also, to decongest the homes where maybe you find 12, 7, 9 persons living in one house, sleeping on the ground and not sure of what to eat the next day. I think any assistance in that direction will highly be welcome. I'm just talking of Bamenda, Bafoussam, Bafoussam as an urban town, which is in the, it is in the Anglophone part of the country. And if we have to go down to other Anglophone towns, we will really see that the population is not there. They are all in the other parts of the other urban towns in the country and still suffering, as we are saying. But I think with the case in Bafoussam, where, because Bafoussam here, people can easily leave southwest, leave northwest, the two Anglophone regions, and go to this town. So you see that the situation here is more serious than maybe in other towns that are further away from Bafoussam. So all in all, we'll be appealing and appealing again that if there is any piece of advice, any assistance, be it from which level, and these are members of the panel, the moderator, we are really on our knees that anything you can do, be it an advice, be it an assistant, would be highly welcome. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jerome, for that pertinent point you've made. Very, very much appreciated. And on that note, I'd like to turn to Professor David Cantor.
Hi. Well, thanks, Dr. Romola. That's really nice of you to invite me to say a few brief words. Listening to particularly Mr. Tembe speaking just now, you really do get, you've conveyed very well that complexity of the situation of internal displacement and just the multitude of challenges, one piled on top of another, that people in your situation face. Listening to some of the other speakers, Mr. Ayo, for example, you know, there seems to be a range of ways in which the problem can be tackled, maybe not resolved, but tackled, you know, public interest litigation, dialogue, assistance by humanitarian organizations, etc. And I think the point I just wanted to finish with in relation to the debate is I don't think it's an either or thing. I think, you know, all of those strategies are extremely valuable and they work together often to create a momentum. Somebody asked a really pertinent question about best practices. And in fact, a lot of my work is in Latin America and particularly in other countries affected by internal displacement in that region. And I think that there are some good best practices there. And one of those is that where different sectors unite to try and push forward or raise the profile of internal displacement, then that's when things start happening, when the situation on the ground starts to change. And similarly, my question around all of that, you know, it's not an either or. I think if we wait till the end of civil wars in many of the countries which have large IDP populations, you know, we're going to be waiting a long time. So it's not, you know, either address the root causes or try and ameliorate the situation of IDPs. I think, you know, there has to be a focus on both of those things. And Romola, you asked me to say something about, well, what's the role of academics in this? And I think, you know, the question that many people have raised about, you know, dialogue in trying to push these processes forward is an extremely important one. And Dr. Leah's point was, well, you know, in universities, even in countries that are affected by internal displacement, you know, often we're not teaching this subject, we're not raising the issue, we're not framing it as an issue of social justice and, you know, democratic participation, inclusion in cities in the way that it needs to be framed. You know, maybe that's something that as an academic sector, we can be more active on, you know, perhaps even bring in teachers so that it's taught, you know, at a lower level of education as well. In that regard, I just wanted to end by saying that I think, Romola, your GENIDA network in that respect is extremely valuable. And for those who are interested in participating and, you know, learning more about the issue of internal displacement, about research on it, about how one can create these sorts of synergies, you know, please do join up for the course if you're interested. It's totally free. Please do write to Romola. Join the network and project that she's been putting together. I think, you know, events like this are extremely valuable. And personally speaking, I've learned a great deal from Mr. Tembe, from Mr. Ayo, Mr. Akech, and of course from all of the chat comments as well. So really, really successful event. And I think, you know, a lot of interesting stuff to come out here. Hopefully just a first step there. So Romola, back to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Cantor, for that pertinent point, and thank you for the excellent summation of the point. And thank you to everyone as well for the excellent participation. I think we had during the course of the presentations today, but more importantly during the course of the pertinent discussions, between 40 to about 53 people joining us this morning, stroke afternoon. Depending on where you are at the moment. Thank you very much for your participation in this. And just to reiterate the fact that the Global Engagement Network on Internal Displacement in Africa is part of a broader network that is being coordinated by Professor David Cantor on internal displacement at the University of London. And we do have sister programs in Latin America, in the Middle East as well, and it'll be lovely for you to also follow up on this particular initiatives, and also follow the Refugee Law Initiative. They're also on Twitter, on Facebook, and various social media networks. And do feel free to write me. I also shared my email address, but just maybe to state it out, it's romola.adiola@up.ac.za or romola.adiola@gmail.com. And you can also write to Professor David Cantor as well. You're most welcome to. And to just mention that we'll be having the GENIDA website up soon, so you could sort of visit the website and see more information on the Global Engagement Network on Internal Displacement, and we'll be having other webinars as well. But of course, we'll be sure to keep you informed about this. And if you would like to get all the information as well, please don't hesitate to contact us, and you can just also drop your email to also make us know that you would like to get further information as well just before this webinar ends. But thank you everyone for the excellent participation, and thank you for the great contributions made to this. Just to re-emphasize that this particular webinar was live, and we would also be having the recording shared on social media as well. And thank you, great thank you to our speakers, Mr. Joseph Tembe. Thank you so much for Mr. Jerome Tembe. Thank you so much for that great presentation you made, and more importantly for really taking out time and traveling all the way to really be with us today. Thank you to Mr. Onyeme as well, Mr. Onyeme Eyo. Thank you so much for coming and for the great presentation. I know that this, of course, would be a continual engagement in this regard. Thank you also to Mr. Joseph Akech for the pertinent contribution made. And I must mention that we also had participants from other parts of the world, and I can imagine what time it must be at this point in time in Australia. I do see Dr. Tamara Wood joining us. Thank you for also being part of this program, and thank you for the great presentation and excellent contributions from Ms. Adelekun, and also from Dr. Robert, from Mr. Richard, and from Mr. Olateju. Thank you for that great and wonderful contribution that you've made within the course of this particular discussion, and also to Ms. Ijoma as well. Thank you for that. I do see that I wouldn't be able to mention everyone's name, but thank you so much for being part of this. And I would also like to especially thank our communications and advocacy team as well from the Center for Human Rights, specifically Ms. Poison for being in touch with every one of us, and also Mr. Simpiwe for really coordinating this pertinent process. Thank you so much for your very kind assistance, and Mr. Tender as well. Thank you for the great updates and the very pertinent contribution to this process. And I think on that note, I would like to say thank you to everyone, and not to forget Dr. Walters. Thank you as well for the pertinent contributions made. And on this note, I would just like to say thank you to everyone, and please do keep looking at the website on the Center for Human Rights, but then also the Refugee Law Initiative, and also the GENIDA website. Once it's up, we'll be sure to send you an email, specially to also inform you so that you can look at it and see other pertinent contributions. I'll also be sure to keep you informed about upcoming events as they unfold, also after the COVID situation as well. But thank you to everyone, and do have a lovely afternoon. I think at this point we can unmute our mics and just say the final words in goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye. Well done. Very good.
Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone. Engineer.